up to Hoisa Gavaya, which is 6 lines from the top 4B, Dalit Amud base, Hoisa Gavaya. If the sukkah is taller than 20 amos, one above amud, and we built in it an amud. An amud is a pillar. Now it uses a different word than previously, where we used the word itztaba. Itztaba was a platform. It's basically the same thing. So, platform, a pillar. So why are we using here a pillar? So it says shehu gavaya asara tfachim. It's tall, 10 handbreadths tall. So what it seems from these words, it's emphasizing as tall, 10 handbreadths tall. That's why it's using the word amud. That this is not like the previous Gemara where it talked about an itztaba, which was a platform, which was lower than 10 handbreadths. This is 10 handbreadths tall, and this one is probably the next thing. And this one, this is a highway. But anyway, so this is a 10 handbreadth tall pillar, and what it basically means is that it's going to be considered like an entity of its own. It has because it's so tall, it's like a rishus. It's its own it's its own. It's like its own domain. Okay, so now the Gemara tells us, so he built this amud, which is 10 handbreadths tall, so it's like its own domain. Sukkah, and it also has the width and the length of a sukkah, which means it has 7 handbreadths in a drop by 7 handbreadths in a drop, and v'yesh b'hechsher sukkah. So sabra by lamemar good asik mechitzasa. So if I thought to say, there's a special law in regard to the holiday of Sukkot, is called good asik. And good asik means that you can extend the walls, you could extend the walls of the sukkah, and even though the walls do not reach the ceiling, but we are able to extend them, and therefore the law is that maybe this is an interesting way of an interesting way of using this law. Because what we're doing is we're extending the walls of the amud and saying, your pillar has walls. Let's say that they go all the way up. So now you're sitting on top of the pillar, and you are eating or sleeping, and you're going to say, well, I'm inside a sukkah because the roof is within the 20 amma, the 20 cubit limit. So you'll say, well, the roof is within the 20 cubit limit, and I have a roof that's kosher. I have walls that are kosher because I have walls of the amud that I'm standing on, of the pillar that I'm standing on. Those walls should be considered good enough. And so the Abai said, let's say good asik, the wall should extend upward the mechitza and make it into a sukkah wall, and it should be a kosher sukkah. So Amar le Rava told him back, for a sukkah, you need to have walls that are visible. So, for example, in Florida, where we have these half-walled sukkahs, that's a wall. That wall can extend higher because it's visibly a wall. Here, you want to use the platform that you're sitting on and say those walls of the platform, the block that you're sitting on, let's consider the edge of it that it extends higher. That's already stretching things. That's stretching things He says because that mechitza, that wall is not visible as a wall. It's visible as a block, as a pillar, but we don't see any extension of it to say, well, we'll just extend it further. And so it's not a mechitza that's nicker. It's not a divider that's visible. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught in a brisa. Noatz arba kundesin v'sikech al gaban. If a person pierced 4 beams or 4 poles into the ground, v'sikech al gaban, and he put schach on top of them. So here also we do not really have walls, but we do have schach, and the schach is being held up by a frame that is basically just 4 beams. So if you did that, Rabbi Yaakov says this is kosher. The Chachamim Paislan, the rabbis say it is invalid. So we understand that it makes sense that it would be invalid because you don't have walls. The question we'll have to deal with is, what is Rabbi Yaakov thinking? Now, Amar Rav Huna says, Machlekes, the argument between these two, between the rabbis and Rabbi Yaakov is what is the case? The Machlekes is al sfas hagag, only when we're dealing with, you stuck these beams on the edge of the roof. The Rabbi Yaakov Savar Darmin and Good Asik Mechitza. So Rabbi Yaakov says that we say a special law of this good asik that we just mentioned a little earlier, that you can extend walls. So here also we're gonna say this special law that we can extend the wall of the house. So you're on top of a house. You're sticking 4 beams into the corners of your house and of your roof, and those 4 beams, we can maybe say that the walls of the house will extend further, because the wall of your house is probably maybe 8 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet. It's definitely big enough. It's definitely big enough, and if so, the wall can be extended. So that would make sense that Rabbi Yaakov would allow such a thing. Rabbanan Savri, the rabbis say, Lo Yamrin Garasik Mechitza, so we can't extend the walls of the house because the walls are not nicker, they are not visible as walls of a sukkah. In other words, they don't extend any further to be a sukkah. All they do is they are walls of your house. Rabbi Yaakov, on the other hand, would say, well, inside the house, they're visible as walls, so we could consider them and extend them further upward. Now, Aval Biemsa Hagag, what would happen if you would stick 4 poles in the middle of the ceiling, in the middle of the roof of your house, and not on the edges? So you're not using the edges as walls, but all you're using is all you have are the beams, the 4 beams. So in such a case, the divrei hakoil, everyone would agree, psula, that it would not be a kosher sukkah because you do not have walls. Rav Nachman says no. The emtza hagag machlokes, that the argument is regarding specifically that case. That case would be a case where Rabbi Yaakov considers it a kosher sukkah. And of course, the question would be, how could that be? How could it be a kosher sukkah if you do not really have walls? What is Rabbi Yaakov thinking? So the understanding is that Rabbi Yaakov is understanding the case. Rabbi Yaakov's view is that it can be considered walls because as long as there's a certain thickness to these beams, we can consider them a wall, and regarding the laws of sukkah. Now, Rashi over here tells us that as long as it's a handbreadth in both ways, in other words, the width and the length of these beams are a handbreadth, so each handbreadth we can say is considered like a wall, and that would be good enough. But the rabbis, of course, argue and say, no, you need 2.5 walls for a kosher sukkah. Now, Iboyilahu, the Bnei Yeshiva, the student scholars, asked a question. What does Reb Nachman mean when he says the argument is in a case where the beams that you're using as your sukkah frame is in the middle of the roof of your house, and you're sticking those on the top of your roof? What would be the what does Reb Nachman hold if you did put these beams at the edge of the house? Would then everyone agree or not? So let's read it inside. The Rav Nachman just said that the middle of the roof is where there's an argument. On the edge of the roof, everyone would agree that it's kosher, because then maybe everyone would agree that you can extend those walls that you have for your house and say, well, if you could say, well, the walls are recognizable, especially for someone who's inside the house. They see these walls. Those walls can be extended above and be considered like walls of your sukkah. However, so in other words, it may be Rav Nachman is specifically saying only in the middle of the roof is an argument, but on the side of the roof, even the rabbis agree. Or Dilma, or maybe Bain Bazu, whether this one or that one, machlokes, it would be an argument. The Gemara answers Teku that Tishbi Yitadretz Kushius V'ibois. Teku stands for a word that Tishbi Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu Tishbi, is going to answer the questions and the wonders of the that the Gemara has just asked. So what does this mean? That the Gemara is unclear of what Rav Nachman really holds, because Rav Nachman only says that the argument between the rabbis and Reb Yaakov is in the middle of the roof, but it doesn't clarify what would be the law in regard to the end of the roof. What would be the law with regard to the edge of the roof? Okay, so that's the Gemara's answer is take it. Jeffrey, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I would like very much to suggest that it took me a long time to understand how to picture these circumstances. So I think we have to make it easier by using different words in English. If we say pillar, I know what I think of. I think of a tall, thin, round piece of wood that the Greek temples had, or in the ancient times, or whatever. I don't think that if we say that, it's easy to understand.
I'll just say a platform. I'll just say a tall platform versus a smaller platform.
Yeah, but it's really like a box. The Itztabor was maybe it had some feet on it and it's flat. But this is like when you get a kid to come up to sing a Don Olam. He's standing on the Amud, but this Amud is a box. It has walls. It's hollow inside. It's hollow inside, but it's an enclosed. Like you said, it's a domain by itself because it's enclosed. And you
why is it enclosed?
No.
Why are you saying it's enclosed?
Because usually an amud is thick and you have to step on it like you're stepping up on a regular staircase, and it's often hollow. And I think that's what it's different from the Itztabor because you could stand on it to daven.
I don't think so. As far as I understand, the amud is not always hollow. The amud would be like a solid piece of. It could be a solid piece just as much as it's hollow. I don't think it has anything to do with the fact that it's hollow. I think it's just an issue of a term used in the Gemara if something is a taller platform or a smaller platform.
So I can't imagine anybody sitting on a pillar, but if we call it
we'll call it a platform.
a different, but
the pillar just means that it's a little taller than the typical platform. That's all. But
so
yeah,
what do we mean when we say he's standing by the Amud?
Not exactly sure. What do we mean? Oiver lefnei hateva. I'm not
That's
exactly
sure. In the
because
it
it does say that the chazan used to be below, like lower.
I understand.
I'm not exactly sure what that means. Standing by the Amud. Maybe the Amud is the podium itself. I don't know. I'm not sure. I have to look up where the term comes from. In other words,
I would like to know exactly because I found it very, very hard to picture the difference between this and you said you're sitting on it. So it has to be something that would hold a chair, because you're imagining the person is eating on top of this Amud. And he's brought himself higher so that he can be closer to the schach.
Right. I mean, I just see it as a similar platform to the previous case.
Okay. So I'm sure other people have trouble also picturing the differences. In any case, there
really is only one difference. In other words, legally, what is the difference between the Amud and the Itztuba in our Gemara? It really could be exactly the same item, just one is a little taller than the other. One is 10 tefachim tall, the other one is less than 10 tefachim. That's really the only difference. In other words, you might tell me that they're, practically speaking, when you use the word Amud, it means there's a design on it and this doesn't have the design, but legally it doesn't matter. We can call it an Itztuba and just add on a few inches and call it an Amud. In other words, that's the legal difference. You know what I'm saying? In other words, you might tell me that there's another, just the terminology of Amud might mean slightly, some other.
And when you say the pillars, the Kandesin seem to be more like pillars to me.
Yeah, true. Okay.
But you said that they could be thick.
Amud sometimes is used as pillars. That's the word.
I understand.
Amud sometimes is used that way.
I know it says Amud Ho'esh, but I don't know how to picture that either anymore because of the various uses. And somehow you made me think that the Itztuba was not a separate enough area. That
anyway, I'll say it translated it better now. But thank you, Jeffrey.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah. I just don't want to take too much time because
right. You're right.
Okay. But good point. Very good point, Jeffrey. Thank you. Okay, so we just explained this case of the Arba Kundesin, which are these 4 beams that are like poles that are being placed on one's roof, and there's a possibility that it means even in the middle of the roof, or it might mean on the edge of the roof. And there's an argument between Rabbi Yaakov and the rabbis, at least in one of those cases, maybe in both cases. Now, the Gemara says that Meisvei, the Bnei Yeshiva, the student scholars, asked a question from a brisa. What was the question? No, it's Arba Kadesim Bar. It says in the brisa, in other words, we're bringing in a brisa that or this is really the brisa that we mentioned. That it says not Arba Kadesim Baretz, that if a person pierced the earth, well, that's actually a different brisa because the previous brisa it didn't say Baretz. So it is a different brisa because we see there's one word different. So you pierced the earth with these 4 kundesin. So it's not talking about a case where you're building this on top of your roof, but you're building it right on the earth, right on the ground. And so you did that, and you put schach on top of it. Rabbi Yaakov says it is kosher. The rabbis say it is invalid. Now, this is clearly a case similar to the middle of the roof because you don't have walls. When you stick 4 poles in the ground, what are your walls going to be? You can't use the ground as walls. You must say that the beams are the walls. So that would be similar to a sukkah in the middle of the roof, and you have beams. You have poles. the poles are going to be your walls. Now, if you were at the edge of the roof, then we would be considering using the walls of the house to be your walls of your sukkah because of the law of extension called good asik, that we lift up walls and extend them. And that would be, if it would be on the side of, that would be for the side of the roof. But this case, we have a brisa that says one extra word here. It says ba'aretz. Because it has this extra word ba'aretz, we know that this is giving us an explanation of the other brisa, where it leaves out the word ba'aretz, and we're going to say that that other brisa is obviously a similar type of case. So maybe the other brisa is not talking about in the earth; it's talking about on the roof. But where on the roof, it would be similar to a case where that's like on the earth. What would that case be? It would be in the middle of the roof. Would be very similar to piercing the earth with these four beams, because you're basically going to use the same four beams as your walls when it's in the middle of the earth, or if it's in the middle of your roof. So let's read it inside. No, it's our book. If you pierce the earth with these four poles, and you put schach on top of this frame, you don't have walls. But Rabbi Yaakov says it's kosher because obviously he's using those four beams to be considered like walls. But Chacham and Paisim and the rabbis say it's invalid. Well, Eretz, now this case of piercing the earth with these poles, the Ke'emtza Hagagdami is very similar to piercing your roof with these four poles. And we see, nevertheless, the Kamashir Rabbi Yaakov. And Rabbi Yaakov says it's kosher. So obviously Rabbi Yaakov is not relying on the law of good asik to kasher his sukkah. He's relying on the fact that the beams, the poles, are considered walls. And that it proves Rav Huna wrong. This proves Rav Huna wrong because Rav Huna wanted to explain Rabbi Yaakov. He couldn't fathom that Rabbi Yaakov held that the law of that the sukkah would be kosher in the middle of your roof, and now we've proven that it will be kosher in the middle of the roof because Rabbi Yaakov is obviously using the beams as walls. So in other words, Rav Huna wanted to rely on the law of good asik, but we see clearly that Rav Huna is not relying on that law because we see clearly that Rabbi Yaakov is not relying on that law because we see a case where Rabbi Yaakov doesn't. You can't use that law. Rabbi Yaakov says the same law would apply in the middle of the earth. Now the Gemara continues and says, "V'oid," and also another proof against Rav Huna. V'oid be'emtza hu depligi aval al sfas hagag divrei kol sheira. Not only do they argue about a case where it's in the middle of the roof, but on the side of the roof they don't even argue because everyone agrees it's kosher. Well, how do we know that? Because the brisa implies that the cases where it's be'emtza hagag, be'emtza hu depligi, that would imply aval, but al sfas hagag, if it would be in the edge of the roof, divrei kol sheira, everyone would agree that it would be kosher because otherwise, why didn't it pick such a case? Leima tevet yuvda de Rav Huna betarti. So let's say this proves that Rav Huna is wrong in both, number one, where they do argue about, and number two, what they don't argue about. In other words, he says they argue in this case and not in the other case, and we've just proven that they argue in the other case and not in this case. And his proof is based on the fact that the brisa gives this example. Why doesn't it give a more impressive example? And the other example would be where. Why doesn't it give an example where it would be at the edge of the roof, and even the rabbis would say, you know what, we don't even allow such a sukkah. So Amar lach Rav Huna can answer you back that no, it's not. That's not a proof. You can't ask two questions. The second one is not a proof because pligi be'emtza hagag v'hu adin al sfas hagag. Rav Huna will say, you know what, maybe I'm wrong in one, but not in the other, because they argue in the middle of the gag, as you just proved, true. But v'hu adin al sfas hagag, they would also argue at the edge of the roof, because they would argue and question if you can use good asik when it comes to a house. In other words, if it's a wall of a sukkah, fine, you can extend the wall of your sukkah halfway. You built half a wall, you can extend it the other half. But or you built 10 handbreadths of a wall, you can extend it till your schach. But on a house, not necessarily can you extend it. So it could be the rabbis even argue in that case. But why didn't they say such a case? Why in the Brisa does it pick a case where it's in the middle of the earth? Why didn't it show a case that would show that the rabbis are so strict that they don't even allow at the edge of your roof, they won't even allow such a sukkah? They should have said such a case. That would be more of an impressive case. So the Gemara says, because why do they argue in the case of the earth, which is similar to Emtza Hagag, the middle of the roof? Because they are showing you the power, the impressiveness of the other side of things, that Rabbi Yaakov is so lenient that even on the middle of the roof he allows such a sukkah. That Rabbi Yaakov even permits such a sukkah. Not only does he permit a sukkah at the edge of the house, because the edge of the house at the edge of your roof is going to be considered that good asik mechitzas. You have that law that you can extend the walls of your house to be considered walls of the sukkah. But we can even say that even in the middle of the roof, that's what's really impressive, and that's why they pick such a case, because in the middle of the roof you don't even have the law of good asik, but you can say that the beams of the sukkah are going to be considered the poles of the sukkah are going to be considered like walls. Okay, now the Gemara continues and says the explanation really for such an idea. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis taught it in the Brisa. No, it's our book in Dason Bardis. If a person pierced the earth with these four round kundesin poles, the sikech al gaba, and he puts schach on top of this, like so, it has a frame for kundesin. And Rabbi Yaakov says, "Rayan kol sheilu yechakuku." We look at all of them, thickness. We look at all of we look at them, these beams, these poles. That Rayan, we look at them. Kol sheilu yechakuku. All of them that if you would carve them out, and divide them, that you would have like an L shape, because you'd have one going east to west and one going north to south. In other words, if you would divide it up and make this one beam into two directions, so as long as you would have the yesh bahen tefach lakan v'tefach lakan, and you would have, after you divide them, you would have one handbreadth going in one direction and one handbreadth going in the other direction. So that would be considered nidoinen mishum diyumid. You can judge these with regard to the law of diyumid, of the beams of a eruv, and say that just that similar to the laws of an eruv regarding Shabbos, that you're allowed to make for a well. They permitted to make for a well in order to give water to the animals. They permitted you to, when the people were oila regel, they're doing their pilgrimage, they were permitted to go and bring water from the well. People could maybe jump into the well or near the well and climb down and drink water. But the animals, you need to bring up water. So the rabbis said that even though the well is a private domain and outside the well is a public or other type of domain, nevertheless, as long as you put four poles around the around and like a box surrounding the well. So if you make a box shape with these four beams, those four corners, the four corners, that would be considered like a private domain. So they permitted that. What was the case that they permitted that? As long as you could divide up this beam into two parts, and each beam is like a wall going in one direction, one going in the other direction. So then you have four of these L-shaped beams. So that is considered that it's a wall, and it's permissible to use on the for the pilgrimage for the people who are traveling, that they can now bring water out of the well and give to their animals. Now, the imlav, and if it's not thick enough for that, it won't be usable for diyumid. Now, the regular law of diyumid was that you needed to be a cubit in each direction. So these are real thick beams. But here, regarding sukkah, they're even permissible for tefach. Shahaya Rav Yaakov Vaymer, because Rav Yaakov used to say, diyumde sukkah tefach, that for the sukkah, a diyumid of the beam of that's only a tefach in each direction, that's good enough. The rabbis say, that you really need 2 full walls in the hand breadth, depending on how it's done. So that is the end of this little piece of Gemara, where we have this unique opinion of Rabbi Yaakov, which obviously we don't follow, but there is such a view that we have, that you could rely and sort of like take this idea from the laws of Eruvin, and you consider it a kosher sukkah according to Rabbi Yaakov for sukkahs, because it's called the law of the Yomid, a special law that makes it considered like a wall. Okay, now comes the next Gemara. What happens if your sukkah is too low? Yeah, I'm sorry, Mordechai, do you want to say something?
Yes. In this last section about taking 4 poles and driving them into the ground, is there any significance to the part about driving them into the ground? Because what about, like, if you took poles and you put them attach them to, say, like a piece of wood? I mean, in other words, like the wood is the base, and then the poles are attached to that or whatever. Does that make any difference, or would it be because it was more common to just take the poles and drive them into the ground?
Yeah, I think the main emphasis here is that you're not putting them in your roof, which then you might be able to use the walls of your roof. So it's specifically picking a case of the ground versus a roof. You get what I'm saying?
Right.
Because that's really why it picks a case of the ground. But if you had a base for your sukkah, I don't think it would make any difference at all. I think it only mentioned the ground was the common. That's a common case, and it's in contrast to the sukkah that's on a roof, which then you might be able to use the walls of the house for your sukkah to be considered your sukkah.
Right, because a lot of the, like a lot of the modern sukkahs, the ones where you first put up a full structure and then put the canvas around it, like at the corners, they're going to have, say, like this L-shaped piece, where the 2 side poles go in, and then the poles that go up and down go into it at the top. In other words, like it goes into
Right.
like these little pieces that have like 3 openings.
Right.
Right. And so that in that case, the poles aren't going into the ground, but they're going into the 3 opening joint piece.
Right. Good point. In other words, that would be a good example of it, except that it's like 1 inch instead of 3 or 4 inches. But yeah, that would be like a good picture of it if you picture the frame of these prefab sukkahs. Yeah. Okay.
Rabbi,
Yes, David. Yes.
when the piece ends over here, shouldn't there be some type of indication of who the halacha is by? You're saying it's Rabbi Yaakov versus the rabbis, and it just sort of like leaves you hanging, and you don't know who the halacha is by.
So generally, the Gemara doesn't often do that. Say who the halacha follows. So it's not surprising at all. Generally, we do follow the law of the rabbis, a majority versus a minority. That's just a general thing. So the rabbis is generally the accepted view. And then there are certain laws of, if you have an argument between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish, Rabbi Shmuel, there are certain rules that we've seen over, over the last few years, where there's certain rules that the halacha followed. Beis Hillel, Beis Shammai, of course, who the halacha follows, but it's not normally not mentioned in the Gemara. Okay, so now we're going to continue. So if your sukkah is very low, it's not 10 handbreadths tall. The Mishnah had said that it is invalid. So the Gemara says, Manolan, how do we know such a law? Where do we get such a law from? What's the basis for a 10 handbreadth sukkah? So Itmar, it was said. Itmar means it was said in the base medrash. Rab Chanina, Rab Yochanan, Rab Chaviva, all these rabbis, Masnu, they taught as follows. Now, before we continue, the Gemara interrupts and says, by the way, this group of rabbis, when it comes to the laws of holidays like Sukkah, we always switch Rabbi Yochanan for Rabbi Yonasan. So these four rabbis are going to tell us a certain law, which we'll soon see, and they learned this. They taught us the following law. But before we get to what they taught us, the Gemara just says the Kula Seder Moyed, the whole laws, the whole Seder of Moyed, which are the holiday tractates, Kol Ki Haizuga, whenever you have this group, Chalufe Rabbi Yochanan Umaile Rabbi Yonasan. You always take out Rabbi Yochanan and you put Rabbi Yonasan, which means that Rabbi Yonasan was they like learned together. This is the group. The group was Rav Chanina and Rabbi Yonasan and Rav Chaviva. So anyway, they taught the following teaching. Aroi Tisha, the ark was 9 handbreadths tall. Kapeiras Kefach, the thick board of gold that was on top of the ark was a handbreadth tall. It had the thickness of a handbreadth, the tefach. So that's 9 plus 1. We have the ark itself, which was 3 boxes. It was a gold box, a wood box, and another gold box. Altogether, that was 9 handbreadths. And of course, it makes sense because it was an amma v'chitzi, an amma and a half tall. An amma is a cubit. How many handbreadths are in a cubit? So the common calculation is 6 handbreadths in a cubit. And if it's an amma and a half, so 6 plus a half of 6 is 3. 6 plus 3 is 9. So the ark was 1.5 cubits, which equals 9 handbreadths. And then you have 1 handbreadth for the kapeiras. Harekana Sarah, you have 10 handbreadths altogether. Sivan, it says that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, V'nayadati l'cha, I will meet with you, Sham over there. V'dibarti itcha, and I will speak to you, me'al ha'kapeiras, on top of this kapeiras, which is this tablet that's with this board that is of gold that's on top of the ark. That's where I will speak to you. So from upon that. So where does Hashem speak to Moshe? On top of 10 handbreadths. Vitanya, and we learned in a brisa. It was taught in a brisa. Rabbi Yossi Omer. Rabbi Yossi says, the Shekhinah never went down to the earth. And Moshe and Elijah never went above to heavens, because
for 30 miles.
The heavens never came down, meaning Hashem, the Shekhinah, never came down to earth. And Moshe and Eliyahu never really went fully to the heavens. Shenemar, as it says, Hashemayim Shemayim LaHashem. The heavens are the heavens to Hashem. V'ha'aretz nasan l'bnei Adam, and the land was given to people, and meaning people can't really go to Shemayim, and the Shemayim, the heavens, meaning the Shekhinah, can't really go down to earth. Sort of like a absolute. There's a limit where the Shekhinah can come down to, and where people can go up to, and therefore the Shekhinah never went down to the earth. And since it says that Hashem went and goes down to on the kapeiras, so on the Hashem comes down to on top of the board, which is on the ark, called the kapeiras. So it shows us that it must be that a domain is 10 handbreadths, that's the size of a domain, that the size of a domain is 10 handbreadths. And that's like, and that's why Hashem could be above that, but Hashem would not be below that. And that would mean that a sukkah would fall into that category that it has to be a 10 handbreadth domain. So the Gemara then asks a question on Rav Yossi just said. It says, did the Shechina never go down to heaven? The divine presence never went down to earth. Doesn't it say that by Yerid Hashem al Sinai, Hashem lowered himself to Mount Sinai? The Gemara answers, no, he didn't really go all the way down onto Mount Sinai. Above 10 handbreadths from the ground, that's where he went to above 10 handbreadths. The Gemara says, doesn't it say that it says regarding the war of Gog and Magog?
You're breaking up, Rabbi. You're breaking up.
I'll try to say. I'll read it again. So, doesn't it say that Hashem, regarding the law, regarding the happenings of the time when we'll have the war of Gog and Magog? So, the days of Mashiach, we're going to have the war of Gog and Magog. Hashem rest will stand on Mount Olives. So the Gemara, that sounds like Hashem is going to subvert. The Gemara answers, no, it's L'mayla Mas. Really, it means he'll be right near there, but above 10 breaths. Hashem below the actual the earth would be the 10 breaths above it, and the domain of earth. Now, you said that Moshe and Eliyahu never went to heaven. Is that true? Doesn't it say Moshe did go up to Hashem? So the Gemara answers, yeah, he went up, but just up, but not until Lamata me'asara, until 10 handbreadths below. Doesn't it say Elijah went when he died, so to speak, when he left the earth? So he went to heaven in a storm to heaven. So it says he went to heaven. The Gemara answers, yeah, not exactly to heaven. He went up to heaven, but not within the 10, lower 10, 10 breaths below it. So Vaksiv, doesn't it say that Ma'achas Pnei Kisei Parshes Olav Anona? Now, when Moshe Rabbeinu went to get the Torah, so it says Ma'achas Pnei Kisei held on to the throne. Parshes Olav Anona, he spread his cloud above him. Malamed Shepiresh Shakai, Hashem spread out Ziv Shchinosai Va'anoni, from the shine of his divine presence and his cloud, Allah on Moshe Rabbeinu, because the word Parshes is a acronym for Peresh, which means spread out. Peresh, Shakai is Hashem, and Ziv. If you put the Ziv means the shine. So you put those three words together, you get Parshes. So Hashem spread out the cloud, spread his shine and his cloud upon Moshe Rabbeinu. And what we see over there is Moshe was all the way up there in heaven to the place where the Shekhinah was. So the Gemara answers, no, not exactly. Lamata me'asara, Hashem lowered the shine of his Shekhinah in his cloud down, but he didn't actually go down to Moshe Rabbeinu, or Moshe didn't exactly come to him. It was there was a 10 handbreadth difference. So Moshe didn't exactly get all the way up to heaven. So the Gemara says, "Mikol makam ma'achas b'nei kisei," but it does say that Moshe held on to the throne. Now, so it means he must have been there. So the Gemara answers, "Ishtar buve, ishtar b'vlei kisei." The chair, the throne, was extended down to Moshe ad asara until 10 handbreadths below, but Nakat Bay, and Moshe was able to hold on to it. So it sounds like part of the chair extended. So that's the Gemara. This is the Gemara. Yeah, I mentioned last time. We learned it. It seems to fit with what the Chassidus tells us, that the Shekhinah is down here on earth, the time of Matan Torah, the Hashem said, El Yoinim Yerdu Latachtoinim, Tachtoinim Yalu El Yoinim, Bani Amaskil. Hashem said, I'm going to begin. And by Yerid Hashem al Har Sinai, Hashem lowered himself to Har Sinai, and there's no more limits, or heaven can come down to earth can go up to heaven. So that's what Chassidus, emphasizes and brings out very, very, very often and throughout Chassidus. And here the Gemara says, no, Hashem doesn't really go. So it's the understanding I have is that it's a machlokes in the medrash. There are two opinions in the medrash. So the way Chassidus understands it, the final rule is the other opinion. But the Gemara brings this view, and this what we're using from this view is to teach that we're trying to prove that a domain is 10 handbreadths, and that would be the minimum size of a sukkah. So the Gemara now continues and says, Bishleima Aroin Tisha. It is good, it's understandable that the ark is 9 handbreadths, the Ksiv, because it says that the ark is 9. The ark is made out of shittim wood, acacia wood. 2 amas its length, an 1.5, 2.5 amas its length, an 1.5 its width, an 1.5 its height. And how much did we say that is? An 1.5. An amma is 6 handbreadths. An amma is a cubit, and a cubit equals 6 handbreadths, and an 1.5 would equal 9 cubits, 9 handbreadths. Excuse me. An 1.5 would be 9 handbreadths, so that would be the height. So we know that the height of the ark is 9. That's good. The Gemara says, "Bish loima aron tisha." That it's good. The ark is 9 because that makes sense. It's an 1.5. Ela kapiris tafach. How do we know that the board, the solid gold board that's on top of the ark, how do we know that that is supposed to be a handbreadth tall? It actually doesn't say it in the Torah. So the Gemara says the Tani Reb Chanina because Reb Chanina taught that all the vessels that Moshe Rabbeinu made, nasna behem Torah. The Torah gave midas arkan, midas rachban, midas kemas, and the Torah gives measures. Its length, its width, its height. Midas arkan, midas rachban. Interesting. The kapiras, it does say how the width and the length and the width. But midas kemas it didn't give the height. So the Gemara says, "Say olamad since it doesn't say what the height, so we should go out it from the least the vessels because it must be similar to the least of the vessels. Shenemar, as it says, and what's the least of the vessels that of the Mishkan that we would say maybe if that's the size of that vessel, that would be the size of the kapiras, which was the board on top of the ark. Shenemar, as it says, by the table, the shulchan that they had the lechem apanim, the showbread was placed on that table, so it had a miskeres. It says miskeres teifach saviv. You should make for it a meskeres, some type of a border around it, which is a teifach, means a tefach, the size of a tefach, a handbreadth. So the Gemara says, Mala halon, just like over there by the table, it had the border that was a tefach tall. Afkan, tefach, here also it's going to be a tefach tall, so a handbreadth tall. And that would make sense that we would learn from the least of the kalim, except the Gemara asks, "V'neilaf mikalim gufayu." Maybe we should say the kapiras is similar to a vessel itself, not just a miskeres, not just the how do we go to learn from miskeres? We should learn other smallest. Learn it from Kalim Gufayo, from other vessels that are bigger. So the Gemara answers, yeah, you can't tafasta maruba like tafasta mua tafasta. If you try to grab something big, you can't grab it. But if you grab something small, that you can grab. And what that means is that we're not sure how big the kapiras is. Hashem didn't. But the thing is that we learn and say, well, if Hashem didn't tell us how big it is, probably similar to the smallest. You want to tell me it's similar to this or to a middle size? Who says you're grabbing too much? You're expecting. You're learning something that's not definite. But if you say the smallest vessel, that would make sense, and that would be something that if you took it, if you said it's the size of the smallest, that would be something to take. It's almost like if you ask for too much, you get nothing. But if you ask for something small, that you get. Here also, when you're learning, when you're going to learn a lesson, the size of it, learn it from something else. You say it's the same size as the smallest one. That could, we would say, makes sense. Say it's the biggest one or a middle-sized one. Who says? Maybe you're taking too much. So the headband of the Kohen Gadol, and that had a certain measurement to it. It was 2 etzba'is, 2 literally means finger breadths. Name is tiny because we learned in a brisa. It was similar to a like a plate, shel zahav of gold. It was 2 finger breadths wide. It went from one ear to the other ear of the Kohen Gadol. Because of all of it, it said on it the words Kodesh LaHashem. It said on it those 2 words Kodesh LaHashem. Shtei shitit, 2 lines. Yud K said Hashem's name Melmaila, the Kodesh Lamed, and the words Kodesh Lamed Melmata below. And so Rabbi Eliezer said that Rabbi Yossi said, I saw in Rome because of Allah of Kodesh LaHashem b'shita achas. I saw it actually was on one line. Because the Gemara says, so the Gemara says, why don't we learn? We're going to learn a vessel from a garment, from an ornament, and therefore we're not going to learn from the headband. We're going to learn from the shulchan, the mascaras. We're going to stop here and have a wonderful day, everyone. Sei gesund.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Can you hear me? Okay, sei gesund. Bye bye.